Welcome to Keep Hustling, where we are going past the why to get to the how. I'm your host, the always hustling Aaron Gordon, aka NY Risk Advisor, aka Mr. Keep Hustling. In this podcast, we will be diving deep into the professional and personal successes of our guests to find out how they hustled through the most difficult times in their life and their development to achieve the success they've gotten to today. So buckle up for what hopes to be an amazing ride. Let's get to it. Welcome to Keep Hustling with my guest and arguably my oldest friend, Natan Edelsburg. Thank you for being here, Natan.
Thank you for having me.
I think that people will think I'm being sarcastic, but I don't think I am not sure. Definitely in the top 10 longest running and oldest friends that I have, and definitely the person who lived within a 1 block proximity of me for the longest time in my childhood as we grew up across the street from each other. So really thank you for being here.
You got it. Yeah, we pretty much go as far back as one can.
That's true. We're not going to say how old we are because we were just talking about before we got on air how old we feel. I'm happy that you're here because I owe you a true debt of gratitude because none of my media or actually trying to get my brand out there or sharing a message or sharing this message with anyone would actually, you are one of the big influences, the coffees that we had, and you just telling me that I won't look like an idiot and I should just do it inspired me. So thank you again for that.
I'm happy to hear that and know that you've leapfrogged ahead of me by, millennia by now. So,
well, there we go. So take us back before the 15 or so marathons and whatever ridiculous other things you do because you have too much time on your hands with 3 little children at home and a job. What do we need to know about you professionally that led you to the position that you're in today in your field as an expert and really one of the leaders in your industry?
Yeah, I was influenced a lot, luckily, by, 2 key people in my life, my grandfather and my mother. And, both of them had very successful and lengthy careers in public relations. And I was exposed to that growing up. My grandfather was at a major firm called Burson for 40 years. He's now 99 and a half. My mother was at MSL Group for around 25, 30 years, another major PR agency. I grew up going to her office a lot. And, as I got older, I kind of learned and understood more what they did. And when that inevitable time came when I had to decide where I wanted to go to college, I had no idea, but I used their influence and guidance, and my mom's especially, and I applied to NYU's communications program. Luckily, I got into it, and that kind of set me off a bit on the path I'm on today. I didn't end up by design going down the traditional public relations route and seeking to work at a PR agency, although I thought about it. But luckily, being at NYU in this program exposed me to meeting the current CEO of my company, who I've worked with now for nearly 15 years and who really, put me on the path that I am today that I'm very grateful for. So that was kind of the earliest place that I was influenced into what I'm doing. But more specifically, I was, in college graduating at a really unique time. The Great Recession of 2008 had just happened and the dust was settling from it as I was going to graduate in 2010. And there was this kind of balloon that popped where the idea of working at a bigger company, which often seemed like the safest option and the safest bet, no longer was the case. You had seen many big companies getting bailouts or falling apart or having layoffs. And it no longer seemed as appealing in general to, I think, our generation at that time to work at a big company. And I also had deep down inside me a really big urge to seek more of an entrepreneurial path. So at that same time, as the dust was emerging from it, the economy was starting to grow again. I met the founder of my company, who created both the Shorty Awards honoring the best of social media and also Muckrack, where I work today, the top PR platform in the industry. And I was so excited about the startup he had launched that was very new, very rough, that I realized that I didn't really want to seek a larger company. I wanted to really pursue a startup where I could be more entrepreneurial with also not having to start my own company.
Well, first of all, I know your mom, obviously, if I've known you my whole life, she's known me my whole life. I'm a big fan of hers. And your grandfather is a legend who I also know. What was it like when you had those conversations, specifically with your grandfather? Because I assume that your mother was in it and parents have a unique view, and the relationship between parents and children sometimes when it comes to, oh, you should do this as a job or you should do that. It's hard to separate as a child. And I work in a family business, so it's kind of what they really want to say and what they feel like my kid should have a job at a big firm because that's what you're supposed to do. But I feel like your grandfather, was probably retired or very close to retired at that point, saw a ton more just from life experience than your mother did. And also there's this unique grandparent grandchild relationship, which is like only good. Like grandparents don't discipline their grandchildren. So like, and they don't particularly care if you fail. Not that they want their grandchildren to fail, but it's not like you're not moving back into his living room. So what were those conversations like when you said to him, "Hey, I think I want to take this bet on this startup," because he probably thought, I'm guessing, that even though big companies failed, they were still better options than you and this guy at a co-working space, whatever.
Yeah, great question. And even though I've disagreed with so many different things as one would with like a parent and my mom, I've always really listened to her career advice very closely. I've never quite disagreed with anything like that. So in a way, all the direction she gave me from applying to college to once I was in it, it was always kind of a positive conversation where it's advice I sought out versus felt I needed to rebel against, which were many other areas.
Right.
So that's one area. But with my grandfather, yeah, it was unique. I mean, only I think once I was more in the middle of my career did I start to truly appreciate what he had went through in his experiences. So I think early on, the best advice I got from him was actually introductions. Even though he was retired by that point, I think when I was graduating college, he was already in his mid 80s. He still knew enough people from the public relations industry that were still in it that were very helpful to me. There's someone named Marco Greenberg who has a PR agency that is a client of mine. He's given me endless advice over my career. And he was someone I originally got introduced to when I was a senior in college by my grandfather. So I think it was less about specifically asking directly, hey, will you tell me what to do or what I should do? It was more getting connected to the right people that helped influence that. Later on, once I was facing decisions about how to grow the company, how to generate revenue, and kind of dealing with the PR industry that him and my mom were so familiar with, then it became clear to me that, wow, I'm sitting upon this really unique individual, not only for me personally, but someone who has experienced so much change within the industry that I'm working with. And, this came through in understanding how he networked early on. And I very quickly saw a parallel that he helped me see between his career and my career. My grandfather was hired as the pretty much the first ever employee of a two-person PR firm called Harold Burson Communications. He was a chemical engineer working on the Manhattan Project, the atom bomb at Oak Ridge during World War II. And this small PR firm needed a chemical engineer expert because of a client they had. My grandfather had had one other job in PR, and he moved to this startup, which at the time in the early 50s was a big risk for his own career as he was, starting a family. And he became pretty much the number two for what turned into one of the largest PR agencies in the world, went through mergers, acquisitions, grew. And he was a really major part of the company, but was not the founder and was never the CEO. He was the vice chairman. He was very clearly a number two. I've enjoyed many similarities in my own career. It's not exactly the same. It's not apples to apples, but I was not a founder. I'm not a founder, and I'm proud of that. I didn't have the idea to start the company like my grandfather didn't, but I'm proud about the impact I was able to make as we grew to now a 300-person company and how I was, one of the main people driving the business forward for many years and still am in many capacities, even as we're now bigger. And so I think hearing advice on his own compensation and how he handled that, what he valued the most, his relationship with the founder and how that evolved over time and how they balanced each other out, what he cared about the most. That was one giant piece that influenced me and that I think about almost every day at work. And then a second piece was kind of the passion work that he did. And very, simply the work that he did that he was so passionate about was pro bono, pro-Israel advocacy, which had a huge impact on me, especially as someone who's not particularly a religious person at all, but is a very pro-Israel person. And he was able to accomplish some amazing things to help Israel. Primarily, he was able to train, under his agency, pro bono, for many years, all the foreign diplomats that would come to the US. He would do media trainings with them where he'd put them up on stage in a mock interview setting as if they were on TV answering news from a journalist. And he'd grill them, he'd push them, he'd take these former, generals turned foreign ministers, these tough men and women, Israelis, who seemingly couldn't be put in place by anyone, and he'd put them in their place. He'd call them out for the BS that they said, and he'd help them, work on their messaging. And with the hope of telling Israel's positive stories, telling their sometimes negative stories. And, ultimately he believed in peace and wanting to push things forward. So that also gave me a really important insight into whatever work you do. It should be tied to your profession, your skills, but you have to also do something you're passionate about. And I've also kept that very close to me as I continued to build my career too. And that's really how he influenced me. And, when he turned 95, almost 5 years ago now, my cousin and I, he's also in the media world, we interviewed him about his last 95 years, and we asked him a lot of questions, and we asked him tons of things I wish I would have asked him 15, 20 years ago when I was starting my career, but I finally did now. And, the answers, once again, were all both fascinating and helpful for the career. And, like reading a history book, obviously, from someone who was born in 1924. So that's kind of how he's influenced me and continues to where I am now, in addition to my mother.
First of all, I didn't know that he did that pro bono work. It doesn't shock me. And God knows we need that help now. So,
Yeah,
and I think that also he probably lived through a time where being that advocate was, we think it's hard today. It was being born in 1924. There was a time when it was probably even more difficult. So I really love that. I want to ask you, I have a bunch of questions to ask you. Of all my guests, I actually wrote down the most questions to ask you just because we go back 36 years. But take us back to the most pivotal moment in your career where maybe you said, this isn't for me. Maybe you said, this is for me. Or maybe you said, this is why it's for me. And then I have a bunch of follow-ups.
sure. I think there were kind of two, early on and then halfway through. And maybe I'm copping out by not answering the one pivotal. But so early on, when I was a student, and Greg Gallant, the CEO and co-founder of my company, came and spoke in one of my producing classes. I was a media and culture communication major, and I minored at the film school at NYU because I wanted to just watch TV and movies for class, which I was very successful at.
Always hustling. It was from basketball cards to hustling videos in college. Got it.
Yeah, exactly. And so Greg came and spoke in one of my producing classes. It's kind of like the new media guy. The Shorty Awards had just previously launched, honoring the best of social media. This was in 2009 when, even Twitter was brand new, let alone Facebook and YouTube. And I was just, taken away and blown away by what he was doing and how he was leveraging this new social network that was emerging. And I'm proud of myself in that I recognized how much it intrigued me and how much I saw in him and what him and his co-founder Lee were doing, because that set me off. It lit a flame in me to connect with them and to meet them and to follow up with them and to really hustle to get to know them. I had to follow up over email. I asked about interning. They said, I don't know what we do with an intern. They were just two co-founders starting some things. And eventually I kept bumping into him at different tech events in New York. He saw some of the interviews I was doing for an NYU blog, and it led him to take me a bit more seriously and give me a project to do. But I think that was a very pivotal moment because I really, I was in a class, I had a speaker, I really recognized the potential. And it almost felt, looking back on it, like I had this kind of, vision for the future, what the future might be or what my future might be in that. And to this day, I'm still as excited about what the company's doing. And back then that was really pivotal because I was a junior in college. I didn't know what I was going to do yet, but I knew they were onto something, and I wasn't going to let anything in my path to stop it. So that was kind of pivotal part number one.
I want to step in on that just for a second.
Yeah.
It's interesting because you brought up the fact that when you are not a founder, and you've mentioned this a couple of times, when you're not a founder or principal and your hustle, if we're looking at the hustle and the drive, is not to become a co-founder, because if you're in a startup, it's not like you're working at a company and one day you're going to become the co-founder. You can never become the co-founder. You can get equity and all that kind of stuff, but your vision is kind of, I don't want to say secondary, because they need that. And I think that very often, and I've heard people speak about this, I'm assuming, I think Jeff Bezos and Gary Vee, and we know, Warren Buffett has had the same, advisors for millennia, for, I don't want to say millennia, but decades.
Yeah.
That obviously the company would have started without you, right? We know that. But how do you keep your hustle in check when it's for someone else in the beginning? Now you have a team and you're an executive. But like in the beginning, it's them and I'm over here and I have to hustle for you in order for your vision to become a reality. And then maybe I'll be able to sprinkle my seasoning in a little bit on the side. But how do you keep that going?
I think you got to believe in the people you're working for in a big way. If you don't, it's going to be really hard to have that hustle. If you look at the news over the weekend with OpenAI and the mess that they're in now, there's this, at least what we're following in the news, there's this yank between the CEO and who the employees care about. And the big question is, will OpenAI be able to move forward without its former CEO? Could they, get behind someone else in that vision?
Or will they succeed in bringing it back?
Or will they succeed in bringing it back? But either way, I think it's always been clear to me. I believed in what they do. Greg and Lee, our two co-founders, have a very product, creative, and technical mind and background, as well as business. And I really wanted to be at a technology company where a product was driving forward our innovation. I unfortunately never learned how to code in a big way above a little bit of HTML, which isn't even considered coding anymore. And that's somewhat of a regret, but I also wanted to be at a company where it wasn't, it was a product visionary doing that. So I believed in what they were doing. I also felt I knew enough about it to understand it myself. So I had enough knowledge of media and PR and social media back then to kind of get it and get along with their vision. And on top of that, I was given a big chance to influence the direction and places we were going. We very much, when we started launching the subscription version of Muckrack that we now have today, was very much an iterative process, agile product development. You build one product, you see how it does, you build onto it. We didn't have a platform overnight. It took us, years to get it to where it is now. And I think throughout that process, I was not only able to believe in their vision, but I was able to influence it. And a lot of that was, sometimes disagreeing and committing, a very famous, Amazon value of moving something forward. And a lot of times, we move forward with ideas of mine. And to this day, I think that's very much a big part of our culture and why I've stayed at the company, because you're able to really get involved. But, ultimately, you got to believe in the people that you're working for to do it. You got to really buy into it, in addition to getting hopefully compensated well.
And I think that this is the natural progression of that comment. And that is, for someone in our generation who is not in a family business, to be employed in the same place for as long as you have is inspirational to me, because for me, it's easy. I'm in a family business, but there's got to be something in you or in you. And you could say you believe in what the company's doing. Everybody says they believe in what the company's doing until the next company comes and offers them 20% more. And it's kind of similar to what their company's doing. So they can kind of make an impact and also make 20% more. And obviously we don't have to get into the details of if you ever made offers elsewhere, but I can just assume that working somewhere for literally 15 years or just over 13, and I think you interned there before, and the company has gone through many changes with you there. How do you keep the hustle and keep the eye on the prize of this company? How do you not get tempted by what's out there? Or by the way, maybe now jumping into being a founder, saying, "Oh, I could do this. I have an idea, and I've seen it, and I can maybe jump in with a co-founder."
Yeah. Well, there's a couple of things. I mean, I've felt in a good way, even though I'm not part of a family business, in a way, I've taken pride in that PR kind of is the family business in a way, through my grandfather, my mom, now me. So that is something that keeps me excited about the PR industry, and it gives me a deep appreciation of the history of the PR industry and how we've gotten from where it began to where we are now. That's one small thing. Otherwise, I think the great thing is that even though I'm not a co-founder, I've been given an opportunity as, a shareholder in the company to really, and like many others at our company too, not just me, to really feel like this is mine too. I'm not just working for someone else, but this is my company too. So a big thing and advice I've gotten from Greg, our CEO, over the years is to keep that in mind in terms of all my career decisions. And so I don't feel like it's just that I believe in them and the product. That's a part of it. It's that I truly feel ownership over it. And that's a big part of what's kept me at the company is the fact that I have a stake in it and one that I believe in a lot. I hope one day might pay off a lot in one way or another.
Do,
So
do you
that's a part of it. And then,
do you think that they were
yeah,
deliberate in creating that foundation, and that's part of what you like about the company? I mean, like creating that
yes.
equity and creating that not just okay. Again, options are great, but like creating the options with that feel of it also being ownership, not just on a piece of paper, but like that feeling of it also being yours and bring you into that fold.
Yes, they trusted me early on, even after I graduated in December a bit early because I had some credits and I committed to like, the spring semester working for them full time. I didn't commit beyond that because I was kind of like, well, this is a startup. I need to like test this out. I don't know if this is a career yet. And by the end of that, when I decided to make it more official, they trusted me by then. I'd brought in some significant revenue to the company by then, and they made the offer, the equity piece, an important part of my compensation package. So whatever I was making back then was now nothing compared to what the value of the company likely is, and therefore my stake in it. So that was a big part of it, and that's what keeps me going. But they've also given me a chance to grow up and fail a ton, right? Like I think anyone throughout their career has to make lots of mistakes. I've made some small ones, I've made some really big ones, but I've always been given a chance to redeem myself, to evolve, to learn new things, to pivot. And I think that even when I talk to people who have had 10 different jobs throughout a decade and a half, that's often something that they're looking for. And so I've been given that chance here too. And if I hadn't failed, if I hadn't grown from it, if I hadn't been given new chances, I probably wouldn't have stuck around. And so I still believe in what we're doing. I'm still as excited about what we're doing. And so that's why I, no interest, at least right now, in doing something else. Maybe in theory, one day, I will have that urge and that need, but I really believe in the idea we're already doing. I'm all in with it. So I don't have some kind of urge to do something different. Part of me feels like we're just kind of getting started. We took on our first ever outside investment just over a year ago. That's really been a game changer for the company. It's only positively impacted our culture and our business. We have a bunch of great new people across all levels, but especially on the leadership team that I get to work with closely that I'm learning a ton from. So I'm more excited than ever before. And on the outside, it looks like I've just been at a company for 13, 14 years, which is true. But in reality, every year or so, it's changed dramatically. And while my email address might not change, everything else has really changed. And the fact that I've survived, often thrived, sometimes not, but mostly yes, has been what keeps me going and keeps me interested.
Were you employee number one?
I was, yeah.
So this is the question, the burning question that I have to ask you of all people that I will have on this podcast. And it relates directly to the listener's hustle. And that is, you're employee number one at this company. And I know that one of the things that your company has been big on since, I don't know if when you got there, but now it's a company of 300. And before it was cool, before COVID came around, you guys were doing the hybrid remote flex work thing. And a lot of people are scared to implement that in their companies, myself somewhat included, because they're worried that that if not present and not having to wake up in the morning and shower, or maybe not shower and get dressed and have your coffee and get into the office. I know you have tea, but get into the office and do those things, that your employees will not hustle. And so you've built that because you have a company of 300 people. And am I right that you guys basically have been doing this since the beginning?
We have. I mean, we have been doing it since the beginning. We've always been a remote first company. We had an office in Manhattan until the pandemic, and
Great
because
space, by the way.
post
Great
pandemic,
space. Great
thank you,
space.
it was. But it didn't make sense anymore. We have the best of both worlds. I live in an apartment with three small children and don't like working from home, don't want to work from home, can't really work from home. So I have a budget to go to a WeWork and get a desk, and that works well for me. Many others prefer to work from home or have a better setup or like it, are able to do that too. But we never required anyone to come into the office, even when we did have one. And now we committed to being remote forever. We even created the Work Remotely Forever pledge, and it got over 70 companies to sign up for it, to commit to it. So we do believe it could work. I think it also really depends on the type of company, the culture, the leadership team. Everyone has to really buy into it. Our co-founders and myself included have always worked well in that environment ourselves, whether it's me traveling a lot and wanting to stay connected or just wanting the flexibility of working at home. It's always been natural to us, from the leadership team down to the most junior employees. But I don't know if it works for everyone. I don't want to claim, I'm speaking for myself mostly, but I don't want to claim that that is right for every company. What I do believe is right for every company is flexibility and understanding that people's situations are different. The same way why many people don't want to have an office, so they can work from home. I'm very grateful that my company reimburses my WeWork, so I have a chance to escape my home for work. So I
Your
think
kids are going to
everyone
listen
is
to this one
different.
day. So you guys come
Yeah,
to me.
I
We'll take
know, I
care of
know.
pops, whatever.
Yeah,
But I feel
hopefully
the
they'll
same way.
forgive
I,
me.
I feel the same way. I had
Yeah.
4 little kids in COVID. But can you tell when like someone starts at the company that this whole remote thing is just not for them? And I'm not blaming the person who remote doesn't work for them, but there's a certain, with freedom comes a certain responsibility. And I don't mean to get philosophical on that, but it's like, for me, it would be hard if let's say I did have little kids that woke me up in the morning. Like I could see myself rolling, like signing on at 8:59, rolling over, and then, grabbing, I had another half hour of sleep. Like I could see that. And that's definitely not good for a company. Someone who doesn't, unless you're working all night and that's your vibe. But you know what I'm saying? Like can you tell that with employees? Do you think that people, because they know you guys are so good at it, they don't take advantage of it? Cause like you could sniff them out. Like how does that work from a management perspective?
Yeah. Well, I'll start by saying that, even if you're in an environment where everyone has to come into the office, I think there's still risks in, like, how do you know people aren't just slacking off at their desks in your office anyway? I think there's potential for that to happen on either end of the spectrum. Maybe one is potentially greater than the other. But I have personally never had an issue with that at all. It could be that it's the type of business, the culture we've built, the combination of it. Because I think, imagine a technology company like Muckrack it just operates differently than maybe more of a services business or financial services business in particular, like maybe you're in. So I don't know enough about the nuances of your world to understand if there might be different challenges. But in my software as a service technology world, we've never really faced that. Has it happened? I'm sure it has. During the pandemic, none of us had a choice anyway for a while. And so we all kind of got used to it. But for the most part, we're a very goals driven company. We value transparency, resiliency, ownership, and we use different technology tools, to track progress. So for many years, I ran the revenue team at the company, and I felt that was one of the most, amicable departments to remote work, because it was pretty obvious if you were hitting your numbers or not. You didn't need to show up anywhere to do it. So I never had any issues with that. I think it's as easy to tell if someone's successful or not successful, whether they're remote or not. I do think it's hard to build bonds with people not being in person together. And that has certainly been a challenge for us as we get bigger. But I'm proud of what we've done to address that and to try and not just address it, but innovate. We've provided, networking budgets internally. We've had departmental offsites. And December 4th, over 200 of us are going to Mexico together for our first ever company-wide offsite. Is that going to necessarily solve every single collaboration potential that could go on? No, but we, being a fully distributed company, has not meant we don't value in-person interaction. It just means we define it differently. And I think we're on the same page that in-person matters a lot. I personally, for me, I need kind of to thrive, but I don't necessarily miss or believe that has to be, by doing work in an office. I benefited more from like grabbing a beer with colleagues at the end of the day after work, pre-pandemic than otherwise. So
Do you guys
yeah.
have like teams get together like once or twice a year, or managers fly to their employees, or employees fly to.
All different stuff. Yeah.
I would assume that someone doesn't work at the company for 5 years and never meet another human. I would assume that.
Of course not. I mean, now, like, this is the first year we're doing it, but now, like, everyone at the company is having a chance to meet everyone else at the company in one setting at this company-wide retreat. We have done department level offsites, leadership offsites, management offsites. So a lot of that has happened. This year was really big for that. Last year was pretty big for that. But you also got to remember, 2021, we're still a very volatile time for like travel. And if you could do that at all. So some people are uncomfortable with it. Vaccines. I feel like 2023 was really the first normal-ish year being able to get together in person again. And even so, there's still people who are at risk that don't feel comfortable doing it.
Yeah, I feel like you guys, like when the whole pandemic thing happened and everyone's like, work from home, you're like, we got this, guys. Like, you should have started a consulting company. Like, hey guys,
Yeah.
I've been doing this since before it was cool. And I think we learned that people are more resilient than sometimes their employers are willing to get to. But I agree on that. Is this a family and employee or just an employee trip, December 4th?
Just employee, no families allowed. I think you could extend it if you want and afterwards, but it's only employees.
As the person I know who enjoys lugging car seats onto airplanes more than literally anyone else I know, and I'm not even being sarcastic, you're laughing. I think you actually are the only human in America that enjoys that. And by the way,
I don't know if I enjoy it.
Everyone should follow, if it's not in the session notes, everyone should follow Jet with a Set, or maybe it'll be Jet with a try something at this point.
You can have a set of 3. That's what Caroline, my wife, has pointed out. So the website has been updated, but Jet with the Set for all your twin or twin plus kids traveler needs.
Or even traveling with any kid. The insight that I've gotten as a father of 5, and my family, my siblings, I love it. So shameless plug for Jet with a Set here. We have first of all, Natan, thank you for sharing. Your story is amazing. I didn't know a lot of that, and we've literally known each other for 36 years. So we're going to have to, maybe we'll get you back. We have a closing tradition on this podcast where we ask our guests to share their favorite, either timely or all-time inspirational or motivational quote and kind of what it means to them. So I will turn the floor back over to you.
Great. And yeah, thank you for having me. I always think back to the quote I actually used in our middle school yearbook, as embarrassing as that might be, but I still believe in it a lot. It's a Michael Jordan quote. I've failed over and over and over again, and that's why I succeed. I think I'm someone who has had some pretty big failures in many different ways, and I'm proud of what I've learned from them. And I think that if you look at someone like MJ, arguably the GOAT, I think you got to imagine anyone who's been able to achieve anything has had lots of mistakes and failures along the way, and that's okay as long as you learn from them and grow from them. So that's my quote.
There is no greater plug for Keep Hustling, because it is the goal of this podcast to give people the insight into some of the failures or just the bumps in the road that the people who they look at and say, this is an executive at a 300-person firm. His life is perfect. Life is great. He's never had any failures. But learning about those is really what this podcast is about, and learning about that journey. So really, thank you for being here. Thank you for being my one of my longest running friends. And thank you again for being one of the inspirations behind this podcast.
Thank you too. Thanks for having me, and congrats on the podcast. I'm very excited to tune into future episodes.
Thank you. This has been another episode of Keep Hustling. Remember, do well by doing good, and always keep hustling. All right, hustlers, that brings us to the end of another fantastic episode. Thank you for listening. The listeners are the most important part of this show. If you like what you heard, please leave us a review wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Your feedback means the world to us and helps us reach more listeners. Plus, be sure to subscribe to our podcast so you never miss an episode. We have some amazing guests and topics lined up for you, and we don't want you to miss out. And finally, if you have any suggestions, comments, or even just want to say hello, please feel free to reach out to us on all social media platforms. We are Keep Hustling Pod on Instagram, X, Facebook, and LinkedIn. We would love to hear from you to continue the conversation. Thanks again for tuning in and supporting our podcast. We truly appreciate each and every one of you. Until next time, stay curious, stay hungry, and keep hustling.